on a highway, instantly stopping tourists and travelers in their tracks, and in many cases sending them home. For days, geologists deliberated on how best to remove this obstacle. So to do that, they measured this boulder in every which way you could possibly think. They analyzed the surrounding environment. And finally, they realized there was only one option. They knew they were going to have to hit this boulder with an impact so hard that it would break it into many smaller, manageable pieces. Later, officials reported that what actually caused this boulder to loosen and come crashing down was an immense storm that dropped over 2 inches of rainfall in a very short period of time. Similarly, there is an immense political storm pounding on China. It's changing strategic sourcing all over the world. And O.C. Tanner is facing a massive boulder right in their path. However, one thing that O.C. Tanner does well, in fact, probably better than everyone else, O.C. Tanner, they know how to make an impact. And this is exactly what they need to do. Dave Gross and his team, in order to ensure profitable growth of the private label initiative amidst all kinds of hidden costs in an unstable market, they need to make an impact. Now, in considering this, we measured this obstacle, and we determined there are 4 areas or 4 options that should be considered. The first one is obvious: reshoring. Vacation's over, go back home, right? Reshoring provides safety, but as we looked at the goals that O.C. Tanner wants to accomplish and the lack of profit by reshoring, we realized that 12% profit is outside of the zone of opportunity. Second, China plus one. Economists are predicting China plus one. This is going to be the trend in 2017. Many companies are doing this for risk. It's common to assume that dual sourcing does reduce risk. However, as professionals, we know we don't make decisions on assumptions. We make them on facts. And the fact is, the nature of this buy has changed. What once was a routine box buy has evolved, pushing up towards a critical buy. This is a relationship area. Because of the political complexity and how important this is to us, we need to maintain relationships where trust, loyalty, and impact and influence are key. If we're to say to our supplier, we're not sure if you're going to make it, we got a backup plan over here, we're going to sacrifice these things. And most of all, we're going to sacrifice our influence. Not an option. The third option, exit China altogether. Many people are doing this. Labor costs have been rising consistently, making places like Vietnam, Indonesia, India more and more attractive. However, when we considered the scores that each of these companies received in the drivers of global competitiveness, we can quickly identify China's high scores still dominating these countries. Right now, China has still got to beat. We need this. We can't walk away from China. The fourth option we considered is also our recommendation. O.C. Tanner needs to trust the zone of opportunity. And today, we're going to show you that China is still the zone of opportunity.
So looking at our big old boulder that we have in front of us, we know that we need to analyze it. We need to really look into it and see what is the core, how can we be able to best make our mark. And to do this, we use a Presto analysis. Political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental issues. And they're all very important. Some have a lot more benefit than others for us, and more weight for us as well. Political, we all know the political aspect right now. There's a lot of strife between China and the United States, and there's always the worry that something is going to happen. But we know that there is a desire between the two parties to come together and build a stronger relationship. And so we wanted to focus on the economic outlook that we have from China. And this is going to be with our ability to increase our relationship with them. They're having a massive exodus of foreign direct investment. A lot of companies are leaving, and so we know that they want us there, and they want to have our business. And so they've also made a lot of strides in the technological aspect. They are able to that help us because they have efficiencies. They have knowledge on how to produce these commodity products that we are going to be sourcing from them. And so this is going to help us a ton. It's a massive benefit for us. And they're social. They have a desire to be a top education level country. They have a 90% literacy rate. That's in the top 25 percentile. Just imagine what it was 30 years ago or so. It was very low, and it made it very difficult for them to compete on higher quality products. And so with this, we are able to have a greater relationship and a greater critical, strategic relationship.
Now we understand the nature and some of the qualities of that boulder that's in our path. The best thing we can do, figure out how to break through it, is to bring to light some of those hidden costs and some of those hidden variables that are driving the uncertainty right now. So there's two areas we want to look at. The first is, with this private label initiative, there's got to be profit there. And because we're focusing on lower tier merchandise, the margin's especially important. The other is, some of the things that Austin pointed out are some of these areas that are causing uncertainty for the company and uncertainty in the marketplace. So we want to dive a little bit deeper into this total cost of ownership. One great advantage we have where China's been such a hotbed for companies to go to for lower costs is that there's been a lot of different people, a lot of different companies that have actually studied and analyzed this. This is not an easy thing though, total cost of ownership. There's a lot of different variables, a lot of hidden costs that if you're just looking at it quickly, you're not gonna find. So what we were able to do is dive really deep into 3 different case studies that ask this exact question: is how much money is it costing me to get my product into China? And they've done this over the last 5 years as the labor costs have increased in China. So you can see up here we've got 5 of the major areas that you need to be able to measure and assign some weight to, and that'll help you drive the total cost understand the total cost of ownership. Of these 5, it then later breaks down, and we'll show you a breakdown of over 40 different criteria that these 3 case studies had in common. They covered, case studies covered 3 different countries and about 6 different industries, and I think it was about 20 different companies total between the 3. And it was really surprising to see how much they had in common on not only the cost, but on how much of a percentage it adds to your total cost. So the first one we'll take a look at is the setup cost. This is the one, so right here this shows you the average amount that's added onto your base price as you're looking to bring product in. Over here shows how much variability there was between the different companies and the different countries that were analyzing this. So the good news is setup cost is fairly low overall, and it's also the one that has the most variability. The reason for this is because the different industries and the different types of buys led to that. The next one breaks it down, and you can see here the averages across the industries. There's actually very little variation. It's surprisingly low, even though the companies were very diverse. So we feel very confident that the total cost of ownership that's added onto this is going to be an accurate guess moving forward. What OC Tanner would need to do is go through and look at some of these activities, look at which ones are truly relevant to them and take the time to really see what percentage is being assigned there. So the different areas, there's the total landed cost, and that one's a little bit easier to get because the costs are more straightforward. The next is product management cost, cost of inspections, cost of changes we have to make to manage the inventory. And then at the bottom, supplier management time, we've actually factored in, and China-specific issues. After looking at all this, we found that a good baseline estimate for the total cost of ownership would be to add an additional 40.5% to the base price of the product you're bringing in. And that would give you a pretty accurate baseline guess for where to start with the total cost of ownership. So on the zone of opportunity, the margin that we're making here is what makes up the vertical axis. And we found that in this industry, 28 to 40% 28 to 60% profit margin is a healthy margin to expect. So on the vertical axis, the other area that's causing a lot of question right now around should we purchase from China is risk. One of the best things you can do with risk is not try to avoid it, but to try to understand it and to find ways to mitigate those risks and have plans in place. Because no matter where you buy from, if it's from China, if it's from any other country, you're adding risk into your supply chain as you extend it globally. So running from China isn't necessarily going to take care of all the risk questions that are around it. So the way to mitigate risk, the process is fairly simple. You need to start by identifying the different risks that exist in the marketplace. Get a good comprehensive list, and then start to implement some habits or routines to monitor those risks and find ways to keep an eye on, are they becoming bigger risks? Are they actually becoming smaller? After you've identified them, you then can assign some weight to these. And these are where your team, as you scan the environment and see different things coming up in the news, see different trends, can start to assign some probabilities, and if this happens to us, how big of an impact is that going to have, and try to quantify the risks. And then by doing that, once you know which risks pose the greatest threats to your company, you can then come up with plans to mitigate those risks. And that's what's going to make up the horizontal axis of the zone of opportunity.
So we wanted to kind of walk you through what a process would be in the risk mitigation process. And as Chance was saying, on a regular basis, we would plan as a team to be scanning the environment, looking for trends, looking for potential risk problems. And we want to identify those in a way that's that we can easily communicate to our peers. So this is a hypothetical risk map of what we might see while sourcing product from China. The risks in the bottom left are less influential risks, things that we need to worry about, but they don't have much of an impact. And as the further you go to the right and up, you need to have a more robust risk mitigation plan for those types of risks, because they actually affect your business on a higher level. When it comes to failure modes effect analysis, mitigation of risks, this is directly correlated with the horizontal axis of our tool to identify the zone of opportunity. Thank you, Rick. And currently in this situation, we believe that China is about a 633.6. Now, the higher the number, the more risky it becomes. And in the failure mode spec analysis, we want to make sure that we have filled in these as a team based on OC Tanner's needs as to what our reaction would be and how the process would be. So when those boulders do get in front of us, because they will, it's going to happen. The question is, what are you going to do? What are your people going to do when they see them? How will they react? And that builds our model of the zone of opportunity. Within the green zone is a healthy zone for OC Tanner to continue operating their supply chain for their private label brands. The moment it comes out of the zone of opportunity, whether the risk increases or the margin, sometimes you might think that a margin, an excessive margin is great, but at what cost are you losing that relationship that you want to build with your suppliers if they know that your margins are extravagant? And that's why we're that healthy 25 to 65%. And as Raylene discussed, if we were to move domestically, we're well below that zone of opportunity, and it's not in our best interest to build a very strong brand when there's not a brand in the market, and we want to be that brand. We're not going to be able to do it profitably domestically, and that's why China is actually the place we want to be in our zone of opportunity. We also want to make sure that we develop our supplier relationship through an in-house process, make sure that OC Tanner continues doing what they do best, building relationships, recognizing people, building upon people's talents, putting them where they need to be. Now, in summary, I want to emphasize that, like we said, stumbling blocks come all the time. But it doesn't have to be a stumbling block, it can be a stepping stone. It all determines on the character of the individual who's encountering the block, the rock, or the boulder in their path, how they react to it. Now, fortunately for us, at OC Tanner, we recognize that they're a people company. They're a company that has faith in their people, and they build their people with the capabilities to make decisions and react to these types of problems. And that is why we know that moving forward with China, we're going to have a successful growth of our brands, which is what we want. We want to own the market where there's no market for specific brands. We're open to questions.
How did you come up with the 28 to 60% margin as a goal, I think you said, or?
So we took a look at several different industries, consumer goods, jewelry, and we looked at what the average margin was for those industries with also the variable range. And so as we took a look at those, we just weighted it, and the sweet spot seemed to be between about 28 and 60%.
If you looked at existing suppliers and new suppliers, what kind of cost did you put into bringing that supplier up to speed?
Here we go back to the total cost of ownership.
Sorry, I'm not numbers.
Sorry, there was a lot on that slide. So on the total cost of ownership, we factored that in because you're going to be spending time with the supplier side. Hopefully, as we've recommended, developing that supplier, sharing some of your core capabilities of improvement with them, helping them become a more capable supplier, you're going to invest some time there. We found that most companies on average, so down here in supplier management, are going to assign some time and some cost to each of these categories here. So the traveling, the engineering support time, the staff's time analyzing the performance and giving feedback, costs of adding to that relationship. So overall, for supplier management afterwards, it's going to add about 4% to your total cost of purchasing out of the country. Was that responsive to your question?
So in his total cost of ownership, your 40.5% is kind of an average of the 20 companies studied and what you looked up?
Yes, so these are average percentages of what those companies were spending on top of the base price. And then this over here shows how much variability there was between those different industries and companies. So you can see here the two that are very different would be your initial purchase cost, and companies all handle their quality management systems differently. And so the cost of incoming inspection was also an area where there's a lot of variability. And I was actually very surprised to find how small of a distribution there was in a lot of these other areas.
And that's across what kind of industries?
So there was different industries, and this was China specific as well. I don't believe I mentioned that. There was some technological, like electronics, involved. There was more raw material type, precious metals, things like that. There was also like bigger, one of the companies that was looked at built parts for the military, so they're building components for larger things like ships and planes. And
I can add to that. There was an agricultural company that really the only source one item was the postal stickers. And so we felt that it was a very robust study because it was such a diverse array of industries. It would have been responsible.
Question. So, on your risk heat map, which I thought was very interesting, you mentioned currency risk. Okay, did you guys do any research? Because it's changed drastically in the past 18 months. The renminbi to the U.S. dollar.
Yeah.
Did you guys do any research on that? Because it makes a big difference.
Yeah, it does. It really does. There's even a fee that we have to take into consideration with every single transaction that we.
Yeah.
And that fee is about $52. There was a large amount of variability. They manipulate their currency so that it's affordable for companies to source through them, like we said, right? And so this is the currency. It is constant. And so, yeah, but it's also beneficial for our company to do that because we aren't importing into China.
Right.
We are exporting, and so that lower cost of money in China, it's cheaper for us to be able to get from them.
The weakening of the renminbi. Okay. Then the other question I had was, and maybe this is too simplistic, but did you consider taking your cost associated with buying from China and negotiating with domestic suppliers to see if they can be better at their cost?
We looked into a couple of things, but we knew that the range, it was going to be very hard for them to be able to reach the 40%.
one of the assumptions we had is there were 2 suppliers listed in the case that had a quote, and we assumed that the same process for the RFP that was used for the China sourcing was used, and that there would have been a comparison and an evaluation at that
You
time.
made the assumption that the domestic supplier couldn't do any better with the price.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Can you kind of re-summarize then in 2 or 3 bullets what your conclusion, what your proposal would be then? I heard stay in China. I heard that. So what are the other key bullets of what?
So the key recommendations we're making here is to, yes, stay with China is the main one. And the reasons we're saying that is because we have a good understanding that it's still a profitable relationship. So to continue to understand the total cost of ownership, we've given a good baseline in the model that we found, and we feel that that can give shed a little bit more light on the total cost of ownership model that's already been started. So to really look at those different areas that are driving cost, and then to see what's actually occurring at OC Tanner, and to adjust that model and refine it over time. So that is the second recommendation. And the third one was the FMEA map that Stephen showed, is to get into the routine habit of looking at the risks. And FMEA is typically used for product quality, but we found in this instance it would be a really powerful tool to analyze, weigh your risks, and then also work as a team to see how can we mitigate those risks. So to implement that process into your weekly, monthly, quarterly routines as you're evaluating this relationship with your suppliers in China. So stick with China, really understand the total cost of ownership, and to implement a risk mitigation process and strategy. Is that it?
These items that are higher risk, did you try to dollarize those at all to see what kind of impact it
So-
would be to continue buying from China?
On these ones, these were a high level kind of hypothetical. We looked at some of the things that were mentioned in the case, and we didn't really dive too deep in any one of these on this just initial example. We did look and assign some risk based on just kind of a quick scan of these different things, what's popping up in the news, what would come up at a quick glance. You definitely need to dive in deep on each of these and look at the realities that are surrounding them. So this example may not be a perfect one that you'd want to take back and actually start acting on right now. You'd want to go in and assign some weights to those with some, a little bit more quantitative.
And to add to that, what we noticed in these things is these particular risks up here, they're very volatile. That's why we would recommend OC Tanner to analyze these risks frequently, maybe even weekly. Form a task force that is a what-if task force. And every week, determine where these are moving on the heat map and identify the impacts and the contributors to that regarding political regulations and what are our competitors doing, what are other industries doing, and what's the secondary impact that's going to have on us. So again, in tackling these, identify the risk level routinely and frequently.
Just one other thing to point out. We want it to be fairly generic because no matter which country you look at, there's going to be a lot of the risks are going to be very similar once you start with sourcing outside of the U.S. And so based on the decision you make, that weekly scanning and adjustment becomes even more important. So that's why we chose to go with
Any other questions?
1 more minute of questions. If you have them.
Good job, guys.